So we have nothing to report out of our previous closed session. We do have a couple items still in closed session. What we'll do is we'll come to open session, we'll have our conversation with John. We'll go back to closed session for our last two items on our agenda. And then we will recess for lunch, and then we'll start with benefits and not benefits and services, board governance. Hopefully, maybe early, who knows? We'll keep our fingers crossed.
We just need to do the draft agenda for the next meeting too, in open session too.
I thought we did that yesterday.
No, we skipped over. We got a little tired at the end there. We skipped that. No,
I thought, I had it up on my laptop.
that's item number 23, and
Okay,
I think
why don't we do that now, and then John can come up and get settled, how's that?
I think Ed Durman was going to give the retiree report too.
Oh, Ed, come on up. Ed, come on up. So for those of you that don't know, Ed Durman in the back, Ed, you got to stand up.
Thanks for dressing up for the
Ed
board.
dressed for,
Father of the funding formula. Show me the money, Ed Durman. Dang.
Respect, man, respect.
there you go. That's the retiree report.
Perfect. John, why don't you go ahead, come on up, and Jack, let's take a look at the agenda.
All right. Just I know it's been a long time since yesterday, but we added two items to the agenda for January, February related to your decision yesterday. So, and we met this morning to kind of get our thinking around it. We'll come back with a report on a governance structure for the new facility, and kind of we're already thinking through what the components of that will be. And by the next meeting, we certainly will have had meetings with bond counsel and our financial advisor, and come back to you with timeframes for and the elements of what it would be to issue bonds and all those things. We'll hopefully have a meeting with the treasurer's office to make sure they're involved in that aspect of it as well. So those are two additional items for the board meeting. The most important item on the board meeting, though, is part two of the actuarial discussion from yesterday, and started to really think about what that report to the legislature will look like. And again, it's our hope that we would have meetings with the Department of Finance and stakeholders prior to that, so we get their thinking on the funding plan. It may be optimistic on my part, but I was hoping we could do maybe a meeting calendar proposal at that meeting. It's justified, my optimism, is that what you're saying? Oh, okay. Oh, we're going to talk about it. Okay, and then we're going to begin the public hearing on the report, which we talked about before. So those are the key elements of the meeting. Yeah.
Any questions about that? Or any?
I still think it's probably 2 days, not 3 days. I'll go back with the things you added from all the meetings you've had these 3 days, but I still thought the timing looked more like 2 days than 3 days. If it was 2 days and 3 days, do you have a preference whether it's the first and second day, or the second? That would be helpful if you could tell me that. The first and second day, or the second and third day?
I don't want to speak for everybody, Jack, but I think that
Well, you're the chair, you got to.
Well, but those that live in Southern California, I think would much rather fly Thursday night than Friday.
So Wednesday,
Home.
Thursday would be all your preference?
I think, what do you guys think?
Wednesday, Thursday.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Alrighty.
All right, that's helpful.
Thanks. Just know, hearing in the past how awful LAX can be.
All right, we'll
Traffic on
get back
Friday
to you so you can get your calendars aligned. That's it for that.
Cool. And before John starts, I just wanted to thank Danielle. Usually I do the count of the retirees, how many retirees are turning 100, the letters that we send out. We have between November and December, 47 letters being sent out to members that will be turning 100.
That's like
2
1
months.
month.
It's a 2
Oh,
months.
is it 2 months?
2 months.
So does that mean?
So
average
20
about
20
25 a month?
Yeah, the average is about 25 a month.
So that's
25 in November and 22 in December.
300 centenarians potentially?
Yeah.
Octogenarians. No,
Centenarians, right?
Centenarians.
I'm not even going to try to say it. Perfect. Hi, John. Welcome to the right coast.
Good morning.
The left coast.
Well, it's nice to come to a liberal bastion for a change.
That was not a political reference.
know,
It was,
I
it was just,
recognized that.
I should have said the correct coast. Okay, there you go.
Well,
Superior Coast?
he's still in the White House, so I forgot that to
There you
continue.
go. Thanks, John.
Well, we got a lot to talk about this morning. I'm happy to field questions as we go along or at the end of each topic, however y'all want to do it. If there are things on your mind that are not on the list, happy to entertain them, give you my thoughts. This is kind of an overview of the presentation. Obviously, the congressional midterms, their implications are an important starting point for who's going to be the decision maker, who's going to be on the committees, what their agendas are going to be. On the retirement savings front, there are a number of initiatives that are pending to try to update rules and address issues. There's a new version of the WEP offset relief legislation that I wanted to kind of walk you through. Investor protection, financial services regulation. There's some real implications of that flip in the House on that front that are actually favorable to our interests. The SEC's come out with a new best interest investment advice rule for our members with respect to their own investments for retirement supplemental plans. Healthcare, that was front and center in the election. Talk a little bit about what may happen there. Infrastructure, and then class action reform legislation. But I thought you can't really decipher that, but it gives you an idea of really kind of what was at stake this time, that the House Republicans ended up defending 100 competitive seats. And when you do the electoral math, it's still an evolving picture because ballots are still being counted, particularly here in California. The Democrats have picked up 31 seats, with 11 Republican seats still kind of being counted. They expect to pick up maybe as many as half of that. But one of the real hallmarks is it's really the year of the woman. It's the first time in history that more than 100 of the House of Representatives are now women. And particularly so in this swing because of the 38 seats or so that are expected to be flipped. 21 of those are by women, Democratic women. So there's a tremendous influx of new vision and new energy that I think needs to be harnessed, but it's a very favorable development. On the Senate side, as you know, the message was not so good for Democrats. They ended up losing 3 seats, Missouri, Indiana, and North Dakota. They picked up 1 in Nevada. There are still several that are kind of in process. They're still counting the ballots in Arizona. They got apparently about 500,000 to go. Democrat has a slight lead. Florida is a recount, and Missouri is a runoff. So we'll have to see there. I mean, right now it's 51-46 with the Republicans. Might go up as much as 54-46 Republicans, but we'll have to see. In any event, in the Senate, apart from nominations, which we've just seen can be done on a majority, in the Senate, 60 votes are required to do any major piece of legislation, which gives the Democrats still quite an influential voice. One of the highlights of this rise in Republican control is that it really diminishes the power of the Senate Republican moderates. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, who would often be a swing vote and could be a voice of moderation, either respect to a nominee, particularly that is no longer the case. Mitch McConnell can just ram it through and they can protest, but they can't stop it as they could before. So it's interesting all the little different ramifications that happen with an election like this. It was unusual this time around. The Democrats, there's all this moaning about losing seats, but when you think that they had 20 seats to defend as compared to only 8 of the Republicans, they actually came out pretty well. And as is often the case in Congress, the pendulum swings. Next time around, 11 Democratic seats to defend and 22 Republicans. Many of those Republican seats are safe, but there's still a number of them that will be in play where the Democrats would try to win back some of the margin that they lost. So obviously, elections have implications. The first one really, and I'm sure you've been reading about here, involves picking next speaker. Nancy Pelosi has thrown her hat in the ring for the first time. Some of the newbies who ran against, I wouldn't say ran against her, but said that they would not support her because they were wary of being saddled during the campaign. Republicans have this it's like B-roll stock film where they just roll Pelosi's picture and say, she's going to be in charge. She's going to be in charge. And they try to tie it to the local candidate. Well, the local candidates were running very localized campaigns this time around. And so quite a number of them said, no, I'm not going to vote for her, as a way to try to insulate themselves from that. But when you sort of cut down to the chase, everyone tries to paint her as this San Francisco liberal. What they forget is she's the daughter of the mayor of Baltimore, and she raised 5 kids before she got into politics. So even at age 78, those elbows are still pretty sharp. And frankly, she raised a ton of money. I mean, she raised on the order of $300 million for the Democrats, for all these folks that have just been elected. And she knows the ropes. She was very effective as the speaker. I mean, we worked with her on Dodd-Frank. She kept her side in line together. And, you can't beat something with nothing. And they don't have anybody right now that's going to kind of step forward. But there's a lot of kind of pushing and pulling that's going to go on between now and just after Thanksgiving, November 28th and 29th, or when they're going to decide to vote on the next speaker, the Democratic caucuses. On the House Ways and Means chairman, the new chairman is going to be Congressman Richie Neal, who's from Western Massachusetts. I think he's going to be somebody we can easily do business with. He was the longtime mayor of Springfield, Massachusetts. So he actually knows what a public employee is, and he likes public employees because he was very successful in doing a lot of innovative things for which he got recognition. Massachusetts also has a very significant non-covered public employee population that don't participate in Social Security that share our interests. And he's been, as I'll talk a little bit more in a minute, he's been a leader in pursuing legislation to relieve the harsh impacts of the Social Security offsets. Financial Services, the person in line to become chairman is Maxine Waters. I'll talk a little bit more about her likely agenda in a bit, but she's someone that is easily underestimated, including by the president, and they do so at their peril because she's a very canny legislator. We worked with her for years on financial regulatory issues on your behalf. She knows how to cut a deal. She likes to work with the other side. She likes to get things done. So I think it's going to be a much different picture than the sort of wild-eyed caricature that's coming out of the White House. Transportation, infrastructure, Peter DeFazio, from Democrat from Oregon, is going to take over. He's got big dreams on infrastructure. Unfortunately, he doesn't have big dollars. So I'll talk a little bit more about infrastructure in a minute, but I'm not sure he's going to be able to get to where he wants to go. Oversight and government reform. It's going to be a very active committee. The Republicans sort of handed the Democrats a major weapon when the Republicans changed the rules to permit the chairman only to send out a subpoena. It used to have to be the chairman ranking member would have to agree. They thought they'd be in power forever. Whoops, now they're not in power. The Democrats are in power. They can send out subpoenas to the administration. Elijah Cummings from Baltimore is going to be chairman. He's a veteran legislator, very dogged. Over in the Senate, they didn't switch control, but there's a lot of kind of shuffling around because they had some retirements. And in the Senate, they have term limits on chairmanships. Senator Grassley from Iowa, Senator Hatch retired, so Senator Grassley from Iowa has about 2 years of eligibility left. We've worked with him on public plan issues. He may stay at the Judiciary Committee, in which case it would be Mike Crapo from Idaho, with whom public plans haven't worked that much. We've worked with through the Idaho system, which seems to have good contacts with him. So that'll be an area we'll be working with NASR and NCTR to bolster the relationship there. On the Banking Committee, which controls financial regulation in the Senate, Senator Crapo is currently chairman of that. If he moves over to finance, person next up is Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, who is a very conservative sort of free marketeer, and I don't think he's going to be particularly sensitive to corporate governance issues, at least coming from us. And the other two committees, which have more of a marginal interest, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, Lamar Alexander, he's a former governor, so at least he knows about public employees. Environment and Public Works, John Barrasso from Wyoming, not much infrastructure in Wyoming, not sure how interested he'll be in the Senate version of infrastructure. So that's just kind of a thumbnail, and let me just go through a couple of the significant issue areas, because there are a number of legislative initiatives pending to try to promote retirement savings. It's mostly around the edges, doesn't really affect us in the main part, which is not necessarily bad. The first is this bill that was passed as part of Tax Reform 2.0 that the House Republicans thought would be a great campaign tool. Turned out not so much. Probably the most important thing for us is what's not in there, which is their PEPTA, Congressman Nunez's bill. Nunez's bill did not make it in, even though we had to fight off this kind of behind-the-scenes effort by the House Ways and Means staff to stick it in. And ultimately, we were successful. So that was a happy result. There is a provision affecting employer pickups. As you know, many of the districts in CalSTRS, they have these employer pickup arrangements in place. At the end of the day, it's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but the employee makes this irrevocable election, have the contributions deemed to be paid on behalf of the employee by the employer. The bottom line is that makes it pre-tax for the employee, which is obviously a happier result. The question's always been, if you start changing around what that election applies to, in other words, if you switch between benefit formulas, if you're offering the employee the choice between benefit formulas or tiers, does that upset this irrevocability notion? The House bill says no, you can do that. So I think people are still trying to come to grips with the implications of that. Is that going to sort of invite employers to start plans to start, having these tiers that are maybe not as generous for lower contributions? We'll have to see how that all kind of plays out. It's not clear if this bill is going to sort of make it through to the end of the legislative process in the lame duck. If it doesn't, they'll have to start over again next year, and I'm not sure the Democrats would go in this direction. 403B, 457, they're trying to sort of do the kind of annuitization that you all already do in the DB plan here to try to sort of avoid just handing the guy this huge wad of money. And so they're trying to promote ways that the funds on account can be annuitized and be portable to, if you're retiring, shifting to an IRA. So that's trying to encourage that. Hatch and Wyden had a retirement savings plan. Most of their provisions have been picked up in legislation already. The new kid on the block is this Portman-Cardin pension reform discussion. Portman and Cardin, Senator Ben Cardin from Democrat from Maryland, Rob Portman, Republican from Ohio. We've worked with the public plan community, and CalSTRS in particular, worked with them for many years, dating back to when they did this tandem arrangement of retirement issues in House Ways and Means. They understand public plans. They understand public employees. Senator Portman's particularly close to the Ohio plans, so we've always had a good working relationship. So unlike the House side, Republicans under Republican control years past, there's sort of a do no harm to public plans ethos. So there's not much that directly affects us. Again, they're trying to raise the minimum distribution age a little bit to try for people to leave their money on account a little bit longer to try to earn a little more. The same kind of portability in 403B, 457 plans. They have a provision you're not forced to try to go after people when you've made these inadvertent overpayments. And that's something I know that the CalSTRS staff has wrestled with. You don't have to anymore to maintain plan qualification. If you still want to, you can. So they're just trying to, give plans some flexibility. Then the minimum distribution rules, again, these are more for the supplemental account for us. If you got small account, that ought not to apply. Don't make these people start trying to draw down the small account at an early age. So that's kind of what's on the table now. Things will obviously pop up and people have ideas. They're welcoming comments. It's a work in progress. So maybe that there's not anything I'm aware of on the kind of NASRA CTR kind of plan community agenda that is demanding action. But we'll be keeping close eye on all these proposals to make sure nothing adverse sneaks in or unintended consequence. So that's something just to kind of keep in mind.
John, does the recruitment idea, does that apply to only to ERISA plans, or does that affect us in some way?
I think it's in the tax code, so because this is a tax bill, so it's technically as I understand, it's a plan qualification issue. You have to have, it's one of these rules that, if there's some massive, inadvertent overpayment, to a bunch of people draws attention if it's, oh my God, we didn't get the address change or the death notice, and it's one of those things that the IRS has never shown much interest in going after folks on it. So
tax side, so that makes sense.
yeah, so it applies to us. So it it kind of, so I know that's always been a concern. One of the issues that they will have to address, they had the special super duper joint select committee, is to address these multi-employer plans that tend to be the sort of single industry Teamsters, coal, where you have all these employers that went bankrupt, their employees are still in, and money's run out. We don't have a direct dog in this fight. I mean, I think the effort there has been, especially in NASR and NCTR, have kind of shouldered the burden of going around and educate members of the tax committees that this is not us, because to the unschooled, a multi-employer plan sounds like the multiple employer plans, which we are, where we have multiple employers kicking in money. Is just a whole different arrangement. So I think we've been successful in that. There were some of the kind of the usual functionaries on the other side, the Tom Arnold crowd. They've been trying to sort of draw us in, saying, well, we're after the union plans, we're kind of next in line to tumble over the waterfall. And so I think we've been successful in beating this back. And here kind of a list of things that we won't have to play defense anymore. I mean, that's one of the biggest implications for us of this flip and control. And you'll see this in a couple of issue areas, is that we won't have to devote nearly as much time to playing defense as we have been for the last half dozen years of Republican control. PEPTA goes away. The Nunes bill had been, plummeting in popularity, and this will put an end to it. An initiative that popped up in tax reform that could have really had an impact on, I talked about this when I was kind of giving you the rundown of tax reform at the beginning of the year, so-called UBIT provision. The Republicans came up with this great idea that they would tax public plans on your income from debt-financed investments, which real estate, private equity, infrastructure, any of that would have been taxed at the top corporate rate. This was a bloody fight that went on throughout, even when they were racing tax reform through, and ended up having to go all the way up to the Speaker Ryan level, and he ended up killing it, though, with the help of the Wisconsin plan weighing in with him. Another concept that really got in vogue among the Republicans in tax reform was kind of a shiny new object for them, so-called Rothification. They're going to take 401ks, 403bs, 457s. We're going to make you contribute on an after-tax basis. No more tax deduction up front. Then when you take it out, tax-free. Well, that's a rich person's, ideal. They don't care about the deduction as much to make the contribution, but when it's, multiplied in value at the back end when they're retiring, tax-free. Well, the problem is if you're a middle-income family, you're trying to get over the hump and making a 401k contribution, not having a deduction is very painful. So that's an idea I think that's now come and gone with the Republicans losing control of the House. One of the other concerns, and it used to crop up periodically, especially among the House Republicans, was why do we have all these special rules for public plans? All these little, special rules for special people. Why don't we just have a one-size-fits-all approach to private and public plans together, which would mean we'd lose all these special tailoring, exemption from the funding rules, things that had reflected the reality of providing benefits in the public sector. Again, I think that's off the table. And then last, and this was an area where there have been proposals from kind of both sides of the aisle. Obama had one of saying, why do we have all these different supplemental plans, 401k, 403b, 450? So why don't we just have one? Well, again, you got the same, there are all these little special rules because people want them and they accomplish something in the public sector. I think that given the leadership and Chairman Neal, they're not going to set out to do anything that would jeopardize public employees. So I think if that turns up, we'll keep an eye on it. But I think that they're going to be looking to get people into plans, and the real focus on small private employers to get them to offer plans. They're not going to be, spending their political capital monkeying around with, consolidating people that are already in plans. So I think that one is off the table. Now here's the whole WEP relief issue. Sorry, the print's kind of small. But basically, right before Congress broke, there was a new version of legislation to provide relief from the windfall elimination provision offset that then House Ways and Means Chairman Brady and then Ranking Member Neal had thrown out as sort of more than a discussion draft, but a work in progress. And I'll talk about the differences in a minute about what the prior bill had done. But basically, what this legislation would do is it would cast aside the current sort of arbitrary statutory formula that is used to administer the WEP that has all these gotcha effects, cliff effects, that sort of thing, and say, okay, we're going to base this offset on your actual earnings, total earnings, Social Security covered earnings, non-covered earnings, and that's the way we're going to sort of apply this offset. So it's based on your actual work history, your actual earnings, as opposed to this arbitrary formula. Now, they're going to provide some relief for current employees of just a flat $100, current retirees, flat $100 a month. The previous bill, and as I'll go through in a minute, had kind of monkeyed with the offset. This, they decided for simplicity, just a flat $100 a month, everybody's being affected by the offset. They're also going to, in the statement you get from Social Security, that, many times people misunderstand how that is going to affect their non-covered earnings. That's going to be reported right in the statement itself to try to warn people that the offset is coming. And then the last piece, and it may be a necessary evil because the revenue, as I'll talk about in a minute, the revenue cost of this offset relief is always huge, and so they're trying to come up with ways to contain it. One way, and it's just a study, they're not implementing this yet, but it's a study to see how public plans that have non-covered employees to have some sort of automatic reporting mechanism about your reporting the identifying information of the participant, and you're also reporting the amount of retirement payments for non-covered employment. So rather than check some box and when you apply for Social Security, but do you have non-covered, they're going to try to make this automatic as a way of avoiding these situations where it's not imposed or it's imposed years later, as a way to kind of, I think, help mitigate the revenue cost of this. So it looks like they're being sort of punitive at first blush with this new bill, but I think it reflects the budget reality that Congress is facing, because Congress, it's artificial, but that's the way they do it. They score their legislative measures, what's going to cost over a 10-year period, beginning on date of enactment. And so the stumbling block, as you all know, to relief under either of the offsets has always been its cost. The repeal is a staggering cost, but even the relief legislation of this kind, it's going to cost tens of billions of dollars. So what I think Congressman Neal and Brady are trying to do is to work within the budget scoring rules to try to make the revenue cost of this manageable enough that it really has a serious chance. So what they've done is, for future retirees who would benefit from this new formula for figuring the offset, they've pushed that off to 2025, which, obviously I recognize for our current workforce our current retiree forces, that's pretty far off in the future, but that's why they're doing it. And the same token on the current retirees, the relief that they were going to give from the, who are already suffering under the offset, the relief they were going to give is pushed off to current retirees. So, it doesn't affect people retiring in the future. It's people who retire now, but they push off when they're going to start providing this $100 to 2020. And again, it's a flat $100. Before they were just going to reduce the amount of the offset in each case by 50%. So, it sounds like the $100 is probably going to be less generous in many cases, but you have to kind of do the math in each particular person's case to see how that really would work. The legislation does drop, and this was the principal provision in the prior bill that had funded relief for current retirees. It permitted Social Security to go after people for the past who should have been subject to the offset, but the offset hadn't been imposed. This let Social Security kind of go back after them, but Congress quickly discovered, going after grandmothers for tens of thousands of dollars that they don't have is not very politically appetizing. So that was dropped, and then once they dropped that provision, then the amount of relief that they were able to provide to current retirees is plummeted. And as a result, then the coalition kind of fractured. The the Association of Retired Federal Employees dropped off, and people said, look, it's not worth the candle to have this new system that pretends to provide relief that really doesn't. So this was put out there as admittedly a work in progress by the sponsors. Comments are welcome. The CalSTRS staff is analyzing it for you all, and they will be back, I'm sure, with the results of their analysis and suggestions.
I just want, John, unless I missed it, I apologize. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the current thinking about the application of this to the inactives. We have 200,000 of our membership that are inactive members, and the original proposal exposed them to a WEP penalty they never would have experienced. And that was the reason our board took a watch position on the bill rather than a support.
These are
Is this bill in the same mode, or, because that was a revenue maker also for the bill?
the inactive. So these are people that have,
This is people that might never retire from the system, but had been members of the system, and the prior bill was exposed.
so they had non-covered earnings at an earlier point in their careers.
Right, but they didn't have a retirement benefit from them, but the prior bill
Yeah.
put them into a WEP penalty over that. So, I mean, suddenly we had hundreds of thousands of people with a WEP penalty that never had it before, so that was very uncomfortable for me to recommend the board that we would support such a bill. And I know Ohio is very concerned about that issue as well. They've talked to me. Is that, do you know where that
Well,
stands?
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that
Okay.
question. I think that'd be something that the staff could look at. I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
that's pivotal.
I don't know that there's a special, if they were picked up by a special rule before that would have been in the prior version, I don't know that that rule survives. So the basic, I don't. the
Well, they
basic
haven't been
formula
picked up. It was
shouldn't
just, it was part of the bill before, and it was, so it didn't go anywhere because the bill didn't go anywhere,
cause-
but
Well, it's,
it was one of their new ideas for revenue to the bill. That's why, again, you know, the prior bill, double prior back, that did not bring new people into the penalty box. As much as our retirees would like to see relief from this, it's a difficult position for us to have 200,000 people suddenly have a penalty, even though it's a very small penalty.
well, I
that.
can work with the staff on that one. I
Okay.
I don't know the answer. I mean, I don't know if they would be caught under the way they're figuring the offset is based on your non-covered earnings whenever they happen to your total earnings. So I think that would be agnostic as between whether the earnings were in the front end or the back end. So I don't know if that's how it kind of came into play, but let me work
Right.
with Grant and Joycelyn on that.
Yeah, that means that when we bring this to the board, that is going to be one of the issues
Okay.
I have to
Let me go back and
have
look
a
at that
thorough
on that.
discussion about. And
And John, if you can go to the prior slide, I just want to make sure that I understand something, and maybe it's just my cynicism and my paranoia, but it's talking about non-covered earnings will be reported to workers on the periodic statement of social security benefits. So it sounds to me that right now, our earnings on non-covered employment don't get reported to social security.
Right.
And it sounds like with, if this passes, then they would. And I'm not sure how much visibility the Social Security Administration has. Well, it's not the Social Security Administration, I shouldn't go there. But how much visibility Congress has of how many dollars are out there. And I guess the cynical side of me is worried that this is an opportunity for them to get a really good grasp on how much money is out there that's not being taxed for Social Security, and that they use that information then to mandate Social Security, which would be a huge revenue stream.
I think that's certainly a risk. I mean, I think that one of the fears I've always had is that they throw the bone to us on offsets and in return for forcing us into mandatory, which they say will then solve the offset problem going forward anyway. Happily, that hasn't developed, but it's a perennial risk that we need to be aware of. I think this has a more, one of my clients used to say even paranoids have real enemies, so we can't, we always have to think about what's really at work here. I think it may have a more benign purpose of trying to cure the surprise element for employees. So it's warning you, because my wife works for the federal government, and the government pension offset, that's not figured into it. So she,
Right.
if you read these things, oh my God, I'll get this big thing from my husband. Well, the same thing here. So I think what they're trying to do, and this is probably a longer term issue, they're trying to sort of start warning people. But clearly this automatic information exchange where, at least at the back end, you're reporting on retirement payments that should be subject to the WEP. I mean, that they're going to find probably some significant dollars out there that they've been missing, but I think that's being plowed back into the package. So I think this bears, we got to think about this from all angles, and I think certainly that number would be, you're right. I mean,
And there's no doubt that there's an extraordinary amount of people out there that don't realize that they're going to be affected by the WEP or the
Yeah.
GPO.
Yeah,
For me, it boggles my mind, because Cal Stirs has written about it. I know our union groups have written about it. We've both at the state, local, and national levels, and we've done so for years. But almost every time any of us talk to somebody about the offsets, I'll go, what?
yeah, I think this is intended, you got to show them their number.
Yeah, and
Otherwise, it's just kind of this vague thing, well, maybe it'll affect me, maybe it won't, and
right.
all of a sudden you can kind of see what,
Yeah, and I think Social Security's probably running into the same type of issues that we run into, because now I think all the periodic statements for Social Security benefits are done electronically. And I'm not sure how many people actually go and get theirs. I didn't realize that I hadn't gotten one in years, and so I went to the website and signed up so I could see what my statement looked like. That might not even, having that figure on those periodic statements might not bring that to surface anyhow. So I think it's a bigger issue. And I think all of us that deal with retirement benefits or safety net issues for a younger generation that doesn't have the same interests as those of us that are getting closer to retirement, that's a much bigger issue. But I think we definitely have to keep an eye on this to see if there are alternative motives. That's just my cynicism, I guess. Thanks, John.
sure. Any other questions on the web? Well, I think that, I'll work with Grant and Joycelyn on this inactive issue, and we'll see how that shakes itself through. It's largely the same as before, so I just need to kind of look back at how they were brought into it. Shift another front, financial services regulation. Again, the new chairman of the Financial Services Committee expected to be Maxine Waters, with whom we've worked for many years, dating back to the proxy access issue and Dodd-Frank. She obviously is going to have a different set of priorities than the current chairman: affordable housing, protecting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, protecting retail investors, keeping Dodd-Frank from being rolled back, which is certainly one of our priorities, and then I think she'll be looking at the big banks and their capital levels. There's all this fear among some that she's going to end up, wreaking havoc in the banking sector. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think she's concerned about systemic risk, and I think that's where she's going to focus her efforts. She said she may call in the big banks all to testify, kind of what's been going on with them, how do they see the regulatory terrain. So I think that was, a gesture. And then she's got a couple other issues that she's worked across the aisle: Ex-Im Bank and flood insurance. So I think this is going to be an area she's going to want to get things done. I don't think she's going to want to just pass message bills, which is what the Republicans largely were doing in that committee. So I think a lot of folks are going to be scrambling to try to develop a relationship with her. We've worked with her, and she has a very good staff. We've worked with them for many years. So I think a lot of people are going to be very surprised. And again, this is another area where it lets us go on and fight other battles. Because the dogs that aren't going to bark under this bill, under Chairman Waters, it's the litany of things that the Republicans are trying to do in the committee that we cared about. Repealing Dodd-Frank corporate governance. They wanted to repeal proxy access, reduce say-on-pay, liberalize the Sarbanes-Oxley control requirements, requiring proxy access, proxy advisory firms to be regulated. That's the big shiny new object for the business community now. They're trying to draw this analogy to the credit rating agencies in the aftermath of the crash, when it turned out they really were kind of just, moving things through the chain without looking at them. I think clearly the House prospects are over. They may still fight in the Senate on this one, but again, I think it makes it very difficult. So I think that we've done a couple letters on that. I think we need to keep an eye on that. Congresswoman Waters, waves them around at the markup. Cal Sturz is saying, so that's been a very valuable tool that we've helped her even in the minority because we've given her the opportunity to express concerns, and we've provided the analysis to back it up. There were bills that had been pushed through the Financial Services Committee to repeal all the regulations for advisors to private equity funds, which have, I think, been viewed as quite successful for investors in those funds. And then the Volcker rule. So again, it's not having to play defense on a whole front like this is very helpful because it lets you devote your resources on the Hill to other issues. In the Senate, again, there's this kind of revolving cast of chairs, musical chairs, on whether Senator Crapo moves over to the Finance Committee, bringing Senator Toomey, who is not going to be a kindred spirit, as I said before, but the saving grace is legislation requires 60 votes in the Senate. Sherrod Brown from Ohio is the ranking Democrat, very close with public plan, very close with the Ohio plan, very receptive to public plan, institutional investor concerns. Every time the Republicans would have a hearing on like the proxy advisory bill, he'd, make a hard charge against it, saying, the clients are all saying they don't want it, so why are we doing this, and making the case. On the regulatory side,
Thank you.
Sure.
Can we go back to slide 12 for a second?
12. Yes.
And I appreciate your views on how this changes the playing field on some of these issues, like the say and pay and the proxy access rules. So do you think that now the Democrats are in control of the House, that we really don't have to worry about any of these issues over the next 2 years, or is there still a chance that the SEC could try to pursue that?
Well, this proxy advisory issue seems to be, proxy advisory firm issue seems to have gotten some legs. Now, whether the SEC would try to, exert regulatory authority over that, I think remains to be seen. Now that the Democrats have taken over in the House, it could be that the business community turns its sort of lonely eyes over to the SEC on this. So they seem to have picked this among all the issues on the board there as kind of the, Chamber of Commerce, National Association of Manufacturers. They seem to have picked this as their kind of issue. And, they're raising all these horribles about how all this inaccurate information is put out by this duopoly, and they keep trying to draw the analogy to what was done with the rating agencies where they had all these problems. The difference there is the client of the rating agency was the issuer, wasn't the investor. And here the investor is saying, look, we're doing just fine, thank you very much, we don't need your help. But it could be that, you're raising a good point, that they could turn to the SEC. So, we're very alert to the, SEC developments, and, we'll be watching that front. I'm saying, in terms of the legislative venue, I think, that's not going to be the venue for this issue. But of all the ones on that list, I think the proxy advisory one is has the most potential for what you're describing.
Okay, thank you. And I had one other question. I think that there was a move afoot to change the rules for shareholders to be able to introduce or reintroduce resolutions, and they're going to increase the ownership of shares, and then if you didn't get a certain percentage of support for the shareholder provision, you wouldn't be able to reintroduce it. Is that still alive? Or?
That was a legislative initiative in the Financial Services Committee. It was they were going to make it, if you've lost, make it harder to come back and just raise the threshold in general. I think that's certainly in my view, off the legislative venue. Now, whether again, the whole the SEC is, as you'll see on this is my last slide, next slide there. I guess it's further along, but the SEC itself is having a roundtable on the whole proxy process, and so that could give rise to changes in the voting requirements they could try to make changes along those lines. That was when we got the proxy access provision in the Dodd-Frank that authorized the SEC to issue proxy access regulations. that was the biggest fight, was the business community kept trying to impose this percentage ownership requirement. It sounds so small, 1%, 3%. Geez, like, oh, it'd be somebody owns a significant stake in the company, not just, Evelyn Davis. But, you look at the numbers on that, and for any of the big public companies, I mean, that you gotta, all the public plans taken together couldn't meet that threshold. So it's possible that the business community could try that again. But certainly this, they make this argument, people keep coming back year after year, whether it's Evelyn Davis, who's now passed, I guess, but her successor, and keep trying these over and over again. If it's failed, then the threshold ought to be higher. I mean, that's something that, could have it could be, receive a sympathetic reception by the chairman of the SEC, who, comes out of the issuer community. So his big thing is, why aren't we having more public companies? We ought to be loosening the restrictions to going public. And he's just generally more sympathetic to, a more smooth, in his mind, more smoothly running system. So again, that's kind of a risk. So I think we'll just have to see, with all this kind of going on, what the agenda ends up being and how much, people try to shift now from a foreclosed House legislative forum to a regulatory forum. So that's a good point. I think we just, we need to be vigilant and keep you advised. Just on the regulatory side, on Dodd-Frank, the regulations are now, I think, embedded in law, across all these agencies. It's very hard to roll them back. So I think the regulatory rollback, there may be some efforts on the Fed on some of the banking stuff, but on our kind of bread and butter issues, I don't think we need to worry about it. Some related topic, best interest standard. As you know, the Labor Department put out a requirement in the context of retirement investment advice that the Broker Act had a fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. Had to, have policies to mitigate conflicts, disclose conflicts, compensation had to be reasonable. Well, unfortunately, but not unexpectedly, some of the investment managers took this on in court. They won in the Fifth Circuit. The Trump administration just stayed home. They declined to defend the statute, which it was shocking because it's a departure from the historic norms where typically the executive in court has defended existing statutes, even those by administrations of the other party. So for the fact the administration just sat on its hands, it's sort of shocking, but then there are a lot of other shocking things about it. So the SEC, which has sort of parallel authority, has stepped in with a very ill-defined, quote, best interest standard applies to retail investors in general. So it's not just in the context of retirement plans. But when you sort of push at it, and Commissioner Kara Stein, who comes out of the Hill, really took the commission to task when they were considering this as a proposed rule, and it's in proposed form now, is that there's really sort of, how much there is there on best interest. There's no fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. There's not even any definition of best interest in the proposed regs. They don't have to provide the best available options. It's really sort of this kind of safe harbor, because the broker can meet it by, one, making a reasonable disclosure about what the relationship is with the client. Well, that's not any big shakes. And then secondly, the broker has to exercise reasonable care to understand what the investment product is. Now, you thought that would be inherent in the current law. They have to at least know what the thing is. And then just have a reasonable basis to believe it's in the customer's best interest. Well, the current law rule says it has to be suitable for the customer. And this doesn't sound like it's terrific, it's moved the ball greatly down the field. And that's what I think the progressives have been challenging the commission on that. They got a raft of comments. They're considering kind of what to do next. These are in proposed form, so the commission would have to issue regs in final form. Obviously, a lot of the investment community has sort of crossed the Rubicon of, adhering in effect to the old regulations, and they're not going to want to go back. But there are enough folks that, well, maybe we can go back to commission. So we'll just have to see how that kind of sorts itself out. So the industry, there's some in the industry that are, saying best interest fine. Others that are trying to kind of water down the standard as much as possible. As I indicated, the staff is going to hold a roundtable on proxy access, on the proxy process, coming up here, I guess next week. The CalSTRS investment staff is on top of this. I guess I understand they may be submitting comments. So this is an area to watch because it's really the whole proxy process itself, which can give voice to all kinds of things that could either be helpful or sort of new obstacles for us. So healthcare was front and center in the elections. You can't survive in Washington without a strong sense of irony, and it was amazing to watch these Republican members of the House who voted 8 or 9 times to repeal Obamacare to suddenly say, well, no, we were always in favor of protecting people with pre-existing conditions. So I think they were sort of, it fell on deaf ears, had kind of the hollow ring of a reason thought up after the fact, I think, for most people. What can they agree on? They've talked to, Trump and Mitch McConnell talked, well, maybe there's some bipartisan things we could do. It's hard to see it, other than around the edges. I mean, there are some of these kind of parts of Obamacare that aren't very visible to the public. They're very important, which are these cost-sharing payments that are made by the government to the insurance companies to help those people with low income who have their deductibles and co-pays. And then there's sort of invisible risk pools where, again, payments are made to the state to set up kind of reinsurance arrangements for people that are really sick to try to keep the price tag for the overall pool more manageable. Who knows what they can agree on in between now and 2020 when Trump is up for re-election. There may be an effort to reduce drug costs. I mean, again, the industry is going to fight that very strongly. The administration's made some fairly feeble efforts to kind of get involved in this area. I mean, there may be things, disclosure of these arrangements between the drug managers and the drug companies and the pharmacy benefit managers, and there's a lot of stuff kind of going on behind the scenes there. But again, everyone likes to talk about lowering drug prices, but it's a pretty challenging exercise, so we'll just have to see. And then just quickly, infrastructure, the president keeps talking about infrastructure. We're going to have a big bill. Democrats say, well, we'd love to do a bill. And I think, frankly, if they'd done a big infrastructure bill as the first big initiative rather than trying to repeal Obamacare, there'd be a lot more House Republicans left today. But the question is, is the administration serious about it? I mean, it's an agenda in the White House that changes every week. The Democrats, they always have these, visions of sugar plums of these big spending packages, direct spending. But what the administration has proposed so far is just very meager. I mean, the federal government kicks in a 20% share. You state and local governments are supposedly flush, are going to come up with the rest. Not so much. And they don't, there's not any real creativity going on. They're not trying to figure out ways in which they can get folks like us kind of on the field to address the concerns that have been sort of holding institutional investors back. They make some changes around the edges in the tax-exempt bond area, but, all this costs money. If you're going to have like this $500 billion or $1 trillion package, I mean, are you really going to raise taxes? I mean, the gas tax is a logical one, but it's always been viewed as sort of the political third rail. Raise tax rates, you can cut other programs, that's the conundrum. So we'll just have to see how that shakes out. I mean, we'll be alert if there are any opportunities. I know over the years, Chris has been on some conference calls with the Senate Finance staff. They were looking for ideas about, what are the hindrances to public plans investing in infrastructure in the U.S. from kind of a market stability and credit risk perspective and that kind of thing. And so maybe there'll be that opportunity again. We've at least established our bona fides on that score. So we could be a player if there's an opportunity. I'm just not sure. And then the last is, as we're crossing things off our list, this is a bill that was designed to throw logs in our path on class action securities fraud litigation by imposing all these procedural requirements that no one could ever meet. So the sponsor of that, Senate or House Judiciary Chairman Goodlatte, whose own son said, "Don't vote for my father." We really reached some new lows in politics. He's gone. He's retired. This bill is gone, so we can cross that one off our list. So obviously, this is a fluid agenda that will be, ebbing and flowing, growing likely as we get next time I come talk to you in the beginning of the year, whenever the early spring. There'll be a lot more flesh on it. But this is sort of an overview because I think, following up on her comments that we got to be alert. That's a big part of this is just casting your intelligence net as widely as you can because there are unexpected venues that, issues end up being shifted over and, and things like, for example, like that proxy advisory. I mean, it's a good point about the SEC because with the legislative route foreclosed, I mean, this is a crowd that, they're invested in this issue. The chamber's really invested in this issue. So they're reading the same newspapers we are, and they're going to, that idea is going to come to them. So we will be alert to those other forums, and obviously issues that you all want to raise. I don't know if there are other issues that are on people's minds, but happy to address them.
Yeah, I have a question, actually.
Go ahead, Brian.
I'm sorry. So the most burning legal issue I have is, well, I actually have two of them. One is, and you may not be following it, but the Lorenzo case before the Supreme Court. Any prognostication on where they might go on that case, which is a case trying to limit liability for the statements made by third parties. If that cut you unawares, that's fine.
Yeah,
Just
I
so
have
you
not been
might-
following that case, although I would say with the current makeup of the court,
It doesn't.
it's
it
not
doesn't-
investor friendly, I guess I would
Yes,
say.
okay. Which leads me to my most burning question.
Yes.
Do you have a health status update on Justice Ginsburg?
Well, she's out of the hospital. Yeah, I mean, she's tough. I mean, there's this documentary about her, RBG. It's really fascinating. I mean, she was first all the way through in like Columbia and that sort of thing. She had a baby in the first year of law school, and her husband's going to law school, and she's beaten pancreatic cancer, which most people aren't able to. And her clerks tell stories of getting these emails from her 3 o'clock in the morning with detailed comments on draft briefs. So she's tough. I mean, those rib injuries, as you know, are painful. But they say she's back at work. So we gotta keep that life support system handy
Yes.
over there at the Supreme Court. See, that's again, that's just to emphasize a point I made earlier, which is, the power of a Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski say, that guy's a Nazi. No way in the world we can, prove him. Is what drove Senator Murkowski, for example. My wife's a Native American, so I'm a little more sensitive to these issues. But Justice Kavanaugh was, no tribal sovereignty. That doesn't exist at all, And of course, Lisa Murkowski, who won a write-in election, driven by the Alaskan Natives. So she said, hey, I'm not voting for this guy. That's not going to happen anymore. So they're going to have Mitch McConnell can just ram through with a majority of these other people that aren't similarly, don't have consciences of a similar nature. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to just keep pumping these things out into the judiciary, and something happens on the Supreme Court, boy. We'll just have to see. So, on that cheery note, any other questions or? Okay.
All right, any further questions of John? John, as entertaining as always, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming out.
Thanks, John.
Yep, that's right. Keep it on the good fight. Thank you,
Another
John.
dog that wouldn't bite. I like that.
This is that dog won't bark.
That dog won't bark.
That dog won't hunt.
That dog won't hunt. I like that.
The big case in Sherlock Holmes. Key clue is that the guy, they couldn't figure out why the dogs hadn't barked
Ah,
when the murder happened.
so Lynn,
Dog won't bark.
if, do you want to start at 2:15? That'd give us probably about a 45-minute lunch, or do you want to start at,
You mean 12?
did I say 2?
Yes. I'm
Oh
like,
my God, no, 12:15.
okay.
I'm sorry.
Dana?
Didn't mean to give anybody, panic attack out there. Or do you want to start at noon? Okay, so we'll keep the regular time for board governance at 12:15. The board has 2 more items for closed session. That will give our members of the public 45 minutes for lunch. Oh, before we go into closed session, yes, Brian, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Thank you, and I appreciate the indulgence of the board. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce 3 lawyers that have recently joined our staff. I know you may have met Saida when she took minutes for the compensation committee, but Behind me is Sheila Ozamaro, and Sheila is Council Special Projects. You'll be seeing a lot more of Sheila because she'll be working with me and on some board-facing items. Saida Dadras, who you've already met, she has joined our Legal Services group. And James Lindsay, James, there you are. James is our first hire in our new litigation unit, and James brings about 25 years worth of experience, and so we're putting him to use already, loading him up with things to do. So
Bravo.
I did want you to meet some of your newest lawyers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome to counselors.
Hope our last 3 days haven't scared you any.
I know, I think Sheila's in shock, but
And so you took our minutes the other day, so. All right, welcome aboard, thank you. All right, we're gonna go ahead and go back into closed session, just for the last 2 items on our agenda, and
With a working lunch.
we'll go to lunch. Oh, no, I don't think we have to have a working lunch. I think we're good.